Hi everyone, welcome and welcome back to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay. Here at Cafe Oleh with Nefesh B'Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed. Whether that's reading and paying your bills, grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, flirting, dating, complaining, job interviewing, all the everyday things you do in your native language, in your country of origin, here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we'd love to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. You can always be in touch with us by email at hebrew@nbn.org.il. You can also find all of our previous lessons on YouTube. Go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh. One of the very first entries, if not the first entry, should be a link to our playlist with more than 130 videos. I think we're now at 21 or 22,000 views. You can also leave us a comment there. You can also subscribe to us there. So you get all the latest classes. If you, for some reason, aren't seeing our emails, not getting our information, first off, all of our classes end up on YouTube. Second, every description of every video for the last 70 or so videos has a link to the attached spreadsheet that we'll start going over in this class. So you are never out of the lurch. First off, because you can always be in touch with us by email. So can't tell us that you didn't get anything, you can always just email us. And second, everything's on YouTube. Everything's there. It's also on our website, but YouTube and email are your friends as well. As always, if you're joining us live on Zoom, we ask you to ask questions about this specific class, and I'm going to give you a specific task in a minute in the Q&A. Everything else is in the chat. Questions, comments, concerns, requests for topics. If you're joining us live on Zoom, just please keep the chat in the chat to a minimum and not delve into or devolve into too personal events. With that, let's get started. So we talked about, we've already started the holiday season and the new year. So Shana Tova again to everyone here on the call. And today we're going to revisit a topic we've done quite a while ago, and we asked, someone asked to review, which is also really good because it also has some important updates with regards to everything that's going on now. I know that people are, even post October 7th, full year later, interested in getting information, worried, want to know Hebrew. Folks, we have multiple classes we've done on it. This is why we keep reminding you, check youtube.com. We've already gotten several emails about, can we do a class on the current situation? We've done it at least now 3 times, youtube.com. Even if you don't see the name exactly as how you would call it, promise you if you scroll down within the last year, you will see 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 classes we've done on the war. So I highly encourage everyone to go back and review. You can also do your own search. You can type in Cafe Oleh emotions, Cafe Oleh doctor. The amount of times we get doctor appointment questions, we've covered it twice, maybe 3 times already now. So highly encourage you to do that. Second, we are covering a topic, like I said, we've gone in the past, which is abbreviations and acronyms. How do you read them? How do you create them? Are there any rules? How do I figure these crazy combinations of letters out? We're going to try to figure this out together, and you're going to find out why I phrase it like that. But what I'm also going to ask you for the 209 people on this call, if you have specific abbreviations or acronyms in Hebrew that you want to know how to actually pronounce or what they stand for, or they've just been driving you nuts, please write them in the Q&A only. Do not write anything about this specific class in the chat. I only look at the chat after the class is over. Q&A only, and I changed it so you can see other people. So please, folks, just like I ask you to look at youtube.com, because there's a lot of you and just one of me, please look at what other people put in the Q&A as their question before you submit yours, because 10 people asking the same way, how is Jerusalem abbreviated, isn't going to help anyone. Right? It's wasting your time, it's wasting my time. I think we can all agree on that. So please look at other people's comments before you write in. Welcome you to submit any abbreviations or acronyms, either that you've seen in Hebrew, or you want to know, can they be abbreviated? Or is there an equivalent in Hebrew as opposed to English? Q&A is your friend. Please scroll through and see if anyone asks your question before we do it. let me first introduce you to an amazing resource we've covered before, but I want to cover it again. And we're obviously going to send out the link to you, so don't worry about writing it down right now, although you're always welcome to screenshot, cut and copy, all sorts of things. This website is called kitzur.co.il, or as you see at the top, Kitzurim veroshei tevot beivrit. What does that mean? It means exactly our topic tonight, abbreviations and acronyms in Hebrew. Kitzur is an abbreviation from the word katzal, short, and roshei tevot is an acronym, the heads of the boxes, if you will, right? And that's how an acronym is created normally, the first few letters of each word. And this is a great resource, and promise you, we're going to set up the link. Please don't ask. You're wasting valuable typing right now if you're asking me for this link. We're going to send it to you. I promise. No surprises here. Okay. What this website is it tries to compile as many abbreviations that are commonly seen, heard, or used in Israel in modern Hebrew as possible. You can even look up a word here. So for example, it says here, כאן תמצאו פירוש לקיצורים ולראשי תיבות השגורים בעברית. Here you will find the meaning, literally the commentary, but it means the meaning of abbreviations and acronyms that are commonly found in Hebrew. For example, למשל, מה זה בד"ץ? מה זה פלמח? אדמו"ר, שוחט, right? באילו ראשי תיבות משתמשים בצבא, ביהדות או בנושאים אחרים? Which abbreviations and acronyms are used in the army, in Judaism, or in other topics? So not only can you do a free search here, it's also grouped by category. Why is this important? Two reasons why this helps answer why do we have abbreviations and acronyms in Hebrew in the first place. There are two major reasons. One we talk about a lot, one we talk about every once in a while. The first one is an aesthetic rule of Hebrew. And this is a very important rule. So if you're busy typing me a question or disruptive, please listen carefully, because I promise you're not going to learn this in formal Hebrew education. That's why you come to our class. Hebrew's default is for the smaller words, the smallest word possible, the fewer letters and the fewest syllables possible to have as much meaning. And we've talked about this before. When you have two words that are synonyms, or two different ways to say something and they mean the exact same thing, but one has fewer letters and syllables than the other, the fewer syllables and letters will always win. Hebrew, like all Semitic languages, but especially Hebrew, likes small, concise words. It's one of the reasons why you can almost always suss out a non-Hebrew word of origin, cognate or whatever, if it's a long word. Hebrew words don't come long. That is a general rule that's pretty much all the time true. Okay, if it's a long word, chances are it's not Hebrew in origin, and therefore you need to apply transliteration rules and all sorts of other things we've also covered before. Okay. So not only is this important to understand why are there so many, why is there a whole website that someone devoted to this, because it's really important, because you'll see we use them all the time, but there's one category in particular this comes in and really important. There's actually two on this one. I'm going to show you the most important one and then the second most important one. The most important one of all of these are all the different categories that come in, from adrichalut ubinyan, architecture and building, Ilgunim ve'mosdot, organizations and companies, bituim, expressions, and so forth, all the way down to industry and acrostics. We, however, are going to focus on Sava, right? Sava, military. If I click on this, you're going to see that there are 1,731 entries of abbreviations and acronyms just from the military. Militaries around the world, not just Israel, we're special, but we're not that special, folks, love acronyms and abbreviations. They use them all the time. If you're American, you know words like GI or MRE or MIA or KIA. Same thing in Hebrew. We use them all the time in the military, and because the military is such a formative part of the Israeli identity experience, they often transfer into everyday society. Both specific abbreviations, and we're going to look at some of them, and the general use of condensing things into fewer words, right? The fewer words, the sharper your order is. That's the idea in the military. The fewer letters, the more is understood. We pack it into as little as possible. That's also the rule for Hebrew. The other place you're going to see a lot of them is in slang. Slang, just like in other languages, loves abbreviations. When you can say one big thing smaller, it's great. And you'll see there's 110 here. Again, this is an ever-growing list. This isn't there is no means an official list, but this is one of the most comprehensive you'll ever find. Why is there no official list? I'm glad you asked, because the next question you probably have is, how the heck do you understand an abbreviation? How do you make an abbreviation or an acronym? So it here has she'elot nefutzot, general questions or common questions. And what's great about this, and I'm going to condense an entire 2, maybe 3 pages of Hebrew here, asking, where is it? I think there's one line here. It says it all together. It's somewhere down there. Basically, this whole page is answering questions about how do you understand them? What do you do when it's one word that you're abbreviating? What do you do when it's several words you abbreviate? Which letters do you include and things like that? And every answer here is going to tell you the same thing. There is no rule. There are no rules in modern Hebrew as how to create acronyms and abbreviations. None. There are general guidelines that this website will teach you, and we're going to look at examples to teach you rather than translate 2.5 pages of Hebrew text, especially on grammatical text. There are guidelines, and the guidelines basically go along the same lines as I just said. The first rule is the smaller the better, right? The fewer letters, the fewer syllables, the better. And the second is, along with that aesthetic rule, is the general aesthetics of a sound and of a word. If an abbreviation or an acronym can be pronounced as a word and it sounds aesthetically pleasing and it sounds like Hebrew, it will. If not, then it will be spelled out. There are very few instances where things are spelled out. There are examples on this. I'm happy to send this. This is anyways part of the link we're going to send you, right, of how to look up things. We're going to look at some common ones that you normally find on a regular basis, right? So with that, let me share with you today's vocab sheet. That includes also some of the background to this. First off, you all probably know a lot of abbreviations and acronyms than you think you do. And I'm going to give you a great riddle, not a riddle so much as a question to all of you. Not only, the question is, how do you say orange in Hebrew? Orange, the fruit, not the color, orange, the fruit. How do you say orange in Hebrew? And where is that word from? If you answered what is the word for orange in Hebrew as tapuz, you're correct. If you didn't know the answer to where it's from, that is a great introduction to our class, because tapuz, as opposed to all the major languages of the world, including of our own region, does not stem from 2 major sources. Tapuz in all other countries, in all other languages, like English, like Spanish, like French, like Arabic, like Persian, like Turkish, like all the other languages of the world, come from 2 major origins. One is its South Asian origin, which sounds like the word orange. It comes from the word naranj in various South Asian languages. Or it comes from the fact that Portuguese sailors and merchants were some of the first people to trade and bring oranges into the Mediterranean. So you have words for orange, the fruit, that sound like the country Portugal, Portugal. Anyone who's ever seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, what's the name of the Greek family? As the father says, there you go. Portucalis means orange, like the fruit. You know that from the movie, right? That is where the 2 major origins of the word orange in languages, except Hebrew. Hebrew is tapuz. And if you thought tapuz was anything but an acronym, you'd be wrong. Tapuz is an acronym. It stands for Tapuach Zahav. We no longer spell it like an abbreviation, and we're going to look at that in a second, what that looks like. But its origins certainly are. It was a word that was coined in the early 20th century after a couple centuries of citrus fruit being grown in the land of Israel. And they needed a word for it because the word doesn't appear in the Bible. Oranges and citrus fruit in general have their origin in East Asia, and they didn't come into the Middle East and the Mediterranean until relatively recently. And so they needed a word that was neither, they were looking for something a little bit more authentic, something a little bit more indigenous than the two origins I just told you, neither South Asian nor Portuguese. They came up with Tapuach Zahav, both because that sounded nice, also because there's a line from the Tanakh that talks about golden apples, when in fact it's talking about apples made out of gold rather than gold-colored apples. By the way, I just said another one, Tanakh. Tanakh is an abbreviation. It's actually an acronym. Okay, so there are many that you're probably thinking of, and there's probably many that you use on a regular basis you didn't know about. And I can see from the Q&A we have at least 6 right now. Okay, so first off, how do you recognize one? If you see a word that has a geresh or slang chupchik, meaning an apostrophe, geresh is one, or girshaim, double apostrophe, chances are it's either an abbreviation or an acronym. This is the normal way that we denote and write out an abbreviation is with 1 or 2 apostrophes. There are very few instances where we use periods, like in English and in other languages. There are very few far in between. The general rule is this. If it's important that every single word of an abbreviation or acronym is included, then you're going to see, periods in between the letters, right? You often see this in things like names of companies where there are multiple partners, and they want to include the first initial of every partner's last letter. You'll see Bet Nikuda Zadat, Samech Nikuda Resh. Sometimes it's pronounced, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's simply spelled out. But most of the time, to indicate something is an abbreviation or an acronym, it's a geresh or girshaim. Where that's placed depends on what we're talking about. Also, the words we're talking about. An abbreviation, we already talked about this, is a kitzur, or kitzur, depending on how you say the letter resh. And an acronym is Roshei Tevot. Okay, I'm going to flip back and forth between the two because we have a lot to cover and I'm just talking fast. But you'll see the difference quickly between an abbreviation and an acronym if you forget what the difference is. Okay, let's look at some examples and learn some rules along the way. Tanakh. Tanakh is the Hebrew way we say the Hebrew Bible. The Bible, obviously, because it's for Jews, there's only one Bible. But if you're referring in a larger world, the Hebrew Bible, Tanakh stands for what? Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. You'll see in this spreadsheet that, of course, you will get as an attachment as well as a link to it. You have not only the actual abbreviation or acronym we're talking about, you have the translation, any notes on the left-hand side. Is it pronounced as a word? That's a very important distinction between other languages in Israel and Hebrew, that many of our acronyms we pronounce as a word. You'll see if it is, it's abbreviated there, transliterated there, and if it's not, it's got an X. Full word as in what it stands for and the transliteration on the far right. Okay, so Tanakh, for example, is pronounced. We treat this acronym like a word, and we pronounce it as such, Tanakh. And you notice where the Girshaim are, the double apostrophe, between the second to last and last letter. Whenever you see that, and we talk about this almost every class here at Nefesh B'Nefesh, it means that the word is an acronym. It's multiple words together condensed into one. In this case, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Tanakh. Okay. Here's another example, and this is a very common one, but one that we don't pronounce. Oleh din, a lawyer. Okay. It's often, almost always abbreviated Ain Vav Girshaim Dalet. Okay. In this case, we take the first two letters of the first word and the first letter of the second word. Sometimes it's reversed. Sometimes there is no rule. It's just what's commonly adopted. Again, folks, there are no rules here. A lot of this is simply you're just going to have to learn or use that great resource I just shared with you to look it up. Some of these you're going to have to make honest guesses and educated guesses based on what already exists. This is a great example, right? Two words, Oleh din, which create in Hebrew the word lawyer, and this is how it's abbreviated. The first two letters of the word Oleh and the first letter of the word din. Okay. One that I've taught you before, one you'll hear quite a lot in Israel. It's slang, but it's used a lot, is sofash, right? Sofash stands for Sof HaShavua, right? You will see examples of two words, and it's just the first letter of the first word, the first letter of the second word, or just like we saw with lawyer, right? But sofash works because, as I wrote here on the left-hand side, it sounds better. Aesthetics play an important role in Hebrew, perhaps more so than in other languages, certainly more than in English. Think of all the silent letters you have in English. Maybe aesthetically, it's pleasing to write these out, but it doesn't make sense when you're trying to transfer what you read into what you say. In Hebrew, we want to be sure that what we say and what we hear and what we write are all harmonious. Sofash works, okay? Also because we hear the word sof, so we know it has to do with something with the end. Sofash stands for Sof HaShavua, the weekend. Right? Here's another one you already knew, right? In English, IDF. Listen to how I said that. IDF, Israel Defense Forces. In English, we often don't pronounce acronyms as independent words. Great example, IDF. Yes, it's an abbreviation for Israel Defense Forces, but we don't say IDF. No one says IDF. If they did, no one would know what they're talking about. But in Hebrew, we say Tzahal. Tzahal stands for Tzva Haganah Yisrael, the Army of Defense for Israel, Israel Defense Forces. Okay, Tzahal. No one says Tzva Haganah Yisrael. Why? Remember my rule number one. Tzahal, two syllables. Tzva Haganah Yisrael. That's 8 syllables. 8 syllables versus 2 syllables. 2 syllables is hands down the winner. Hands down. Nah. Right? Tzahal will win over Tzva Haganah Yisrael. Every time on the news they're talking, they are not going to keep saying Tzva Haganah Yisrael. They're going to say Tzahal. Okay? Not just talking about military, but specifically Israel's military. Okay, let's look at some other ones. Some of these are random. I tried to do these as best as I could in alphabetical order, taking from a wide swath of places, and some of them are more categorized towards the bottom. Okay, and again, Q&A is your place to ask for abbreviations and acronyms, some of which, by the way, folks, I'm probably going to cover. So if I do cover, I would love if you erase your question if I already cover it. If not, you can also just be patient and wait till I get through the end of this short list. You have that great resource we're going to send you anyways. Afternoon. Afternoon is a great one. Why? Because first off, English, we have it, PM, right? We have AM and PM. In Hebrew, we don't need an AM because we say bokel. Bokel with its 4 letters and 2 syllables, easy enough. Don't need to worry about it. Acharei HaTzoraim, however, that's a lot of letters, that's a lot of syllables, that's a lot of guttural sounds, right? Acharei HaTzoraim. When we're writing out Acharei HaTzoraim, you can simply abbreviate it, right? We don't say you can acronymize it. We simply say abbreviate, even if it's an acronym. Achar HaTzoraim. Aleph Chet Hey, Aleph Chet Hey, Girshaim Tzadi. Okay, that is the generally accepted and understood acronym for afternoon. Is it pronounced as a word? No. I see we have it should be Achar HaTzoraim or Acharei HaTzoraim. Okay, here's another great one. Bederch Klal. Bederch Klal in Hebrew means usually, generally, but mainly usually. You can conjugate, you can shorten, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 letters plus a space into 3 letters with Gilshaim. Bet, Dalid, Gilshaim, Kaf, almost all the time stands for generally or usually. Okay, simple as that. One that some of you may already be familiar with, and this one is from Judaism. Not all of them come from the army. Like I said, they come from a wide variety of them. What's noticeable about ones that come from Jewish tradition is that with the exception of names, we usually don't pronounce them as a word. So for example, Bet Hey, right? Bet Gilshaim Hey can stand for Baruch Hashem, thank God, or Bezrat Hashem, God willing. Okay, either one is abbreviated as Bet Hey. We don't pronounce this. This one, however, we do. Ba'am. Ba'am stands for a word you are never going to use. Be'eravun mugbal. Even if you own a be'eravun mugbal, you're never going to use be'eravun mugbal. You're simply going to say ba'am. Ba'am is the equivalent in American English of LLC and the equivalent in British English of LTD. This is a limited company, right? If you are a registered limited company, you are ba'am in Israel. Okay, and it stands for Be'eravun Mugbal, limited liability company, hence the American English. Okay, here's a great example of an abbreviation. This is not an acronym, this is an abbreviation. Why? Because it's one word and there's one geresh, there is one apostrophe, gveret. Gveret in Israel, in Hebrew, remember, is Ms. or Mrs. Doesn't matter if they kept their last name or not, doesn't matter the marital status. Gveret is an older woman that you're referring to with respect. Ms., Mrs. Hey, we don't pronounce it. You read out the whole thing, gveret, but you write it out almost always as gimel bet geresh. Okay, this is the difference between a language that's spoken and a language that's written. So if you're texting, if you're writing a letter, if you're reading the news, if you're reading an email, if you're reading a letter, it's almost always going to be abbreviated, just like you would in English. You do not write Mrs. out or Ms. or anything out. You use the abbreviation. Same thing in Hebrew. Doctor is a exception to the rule. Why? Because first off, we have a Hebrew word for doctor, rofeh, but there are very few doctors in Hebrew in Israel, Rofim, that are given the title or they're known by their title, Rofeh, such and such's name, or with a resh because Rofeh starts with a resh, geresh, and their name. Instead, we use the English doctor, or whatever language you want to say it comes from, doctor that is either abbreviated as Dalid Resh Chupchik, geresh, or Dalid Gilshaim Resh. Why is this an exception? First off, because we're not using the Hebrew. And second, doctor is one word. So this usually only applies to a word, to an acronym, right? Where there's multiple words that we're abbreviating together. Instead, you will find both of these abbreviations used all the time for DR, right? That's what we're abbreviating here is doctor. DR. Okay? Just like in English, you're not going to write out the word doctor each time, you're going to write DR. Here's another place. I told you that one of the another big categories in that list of abbreviations and acronyms is slang. Here's a great one. Chavlaz. Chaval al hazman is slang from several decades ago that's still used. Chaval al hazman originally meant as a slang term, as an idiomatic expression, a waste of time. However, just like the word bad in the 1980s became good, chaval al hazman used nowadays usually means something positive, amazing, awesome, great. If you describe something as chaval al hazman, almost all the time you mean something positive nowadays. And if you want to further emphasize that you're talking about only something positive, you're going to use the acronym chavlaz. Not only are you going to use the word chavlaz, You're going to even turn it into an adjective. We have a whole other lesson about that, how to create new words, including from nouns to adjectives. All you have to do is add a yud at the end of this word, chavlazi. You now have a adjective. Zo hayta chavaya chavlazit. That was an awesome, amazing experience. Zo hayta chavaya chaval al hazman. I turned the acronym not just from a word, from a noun into an adjective. Hebrew's great like that. Okay, but chaval al hazman is abbreviated many times as chavlaz. And you'll even hear people say chavlaz, as I put here. Here's one. This is not a nice one, but we say it here in Tel Aviv. The equivalent in Tel Aviv for snobby Tel Avivians looking down at what we call in America bridge and tunnel crowd, right? Those of you from the New York metro area, you know what bridge and tunnel means. In order to get into Manhattan Island, you have to cross either a bridge or go through a tunnel. Therefore, you are not from the city of the borough of Manhattan, and therefore outsiders. Hebrew slang, Tel Aviv slang, has its own version of it, which is chubatim. Chubatim stands for Chulon u Bat Yam. Okay, Chulon, right? Chulon, Chet, u Bat Yam, Bat Yam. Okay, Chubati is one, Chubatim are plural. It's slang. It's not the nicest thing to say to someone who's from Chulon or Bat Yam, but also by extension, anyone from the immediate suburbs around Tel Aviv. The fact that I call it suburbs as opposed to cities, because they are technically cities, shows my own snobbery, right? But it stands for Chulon u Bat Yam. Chubatim. Another one, this one we talk about a lot, Chul. Chul is also a acronym, and it means simply in modern Hebrew abroad. But in its literal term, it means chutz la'aretz, outside of the land of Israel. Chutz la'aretz, as it says here in row E, chutz la'aretz, outside of the land, i.e. the land of Israel. Chul is anywhere outside of Israel. Right? There's even slang. You can call someone who's not from Israel a chulnik. Chul, outside of Israel, and nik, which is borrowed from Slavic languages at the end of a word like kibbutznik or refusenik or moshavnik, means someone who is of that origin. In this case, someone who is from abroad. Another army term, we're going to come through a lot of army terms in this class with the time we have remaining, chamshush. Chamshush is a long weekend, and it stands for Chamishi, Shishi, V'Shabbat, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Chamshush. If someone gets a chamshush, they have a long weekend pass out of military service. Okay, let's look at some other examples that you'll see all the time. Yechida. Yechida is a unit. When you go grocery shopping and it's listing the price of something, especially produce or meat or cheese or anything that's being weighed, it's going to tell you the price either per kilogram, and we're going to get to that abbreviation in a minute, or that the price is per unit, meaning if you are buying a pineapple, ananas, you need to see if the price that they're quoting you is per kilogram, because it says Israel, or is it per yechida? And you will see this abbreviation after the price that indicates if it's this abbreviation, it means that price is for the whole piece of fruit. It's not per kilogram, not by weight, in other words. A more recent one, this is a borrowing from abroad, turning it into Hebrew, is lahatab. Lahatab is the most acceptable way to refer to LGBT people because it is the same thing as saying LGBT. In this case, standing for lesbi, homosexuali, trans, bisexuali, lahatab. Okay, LGBT. Meter, or in Hebrew, meter, is usually abbreviated as mem, geresh. Milligram, words that are one word in English, but actually derived from two different parts, right? Just like a lot of our weights and measures and distances in English and in other languages are comprised of a prefix and then the unit, right? So milligram, when you have that kind of word, or we're going to see kilogram, kilometer, centimeter, all of those things, you're going to see it abbreviated, but both ways, either as one word, milligram, where it's taking the first word, first part of it, mem, and the second part, gimel, or it's going to do like this, as if it was two separately spelled words. Either one is acceptable. You're going to see both, especially those of you looking at the nutritional value of something, for example. This is what you're going to look for, milligram. Okay? Millimeter, mem, mem. Mem, mem, by the way, will stand for a lot of things in Hebrew, but when we're talking about units of distance, millimeter. Ma'am. Ma'am is a very important one, especially if you want to keep track of your finances, especially if you're coming from abroad, especially if you are going abroad, all sorts of things. Ma'am stands for Mas Erech Musaf, aka value-added tax, VAT. Ma'am. Okay. Mem, kuf, tet. I have heard people say makat, but chances are you don't need to know this word. This is a catalog number. This is simply what a store or a company uses to register its own internally registering products. Catalog number, mispal katalogi. A word we've talked about before, nadlan. Okay, nadlan means real estate. You will only ever hear nadlan. I bet if I asked people, even real estate agents, they wouldn't know what nadlan stands for. It stands for nichsei dlan naideh, not Hebrew, Aramaic, immovable property, immobile property, just like you say in French and in other languages, real estate, nadlan. Centimeter, we did that one. Great one. Sachakol. Sachakol is also not pronounced, as you see, it has an X through it, the total sum of something, right at the end of a bill or a receipt or an invoice, how much is owed, including ma'am, including VAT, and in the other taxes, sachakol. At the hands of or simply by. A regular everyday word that we use, al yedei, is abbreviated oftentimes as ayin yud, even though the word itself, two words, one is two letters, one is three letters, together doesn't make a huge amount of space. It's easier to abbreviate them, especially if we use them again and again. A lot of common words are abbreviated like that, so you don't have to keep doing it. Kilogram, you'll find either abbreviated as kuf gilshaim gimel or simply kilo. Okay. Kilometer, kuf mem. Again, when it's in that context, it means kilometer. This one we do pronounce, which is kamash. Kamash is kilometer, kilometers per hour, or in Hebrew, kilometer lesha'a. Kamash. Right? How fast are you driving? Let's look at some other ones. Resh He. We just celebrated this holiday, Rosh Hashanah. If you looked at certain texts, calendars, notes, memos, they would have used this abbreviation instead of just keep writing Rosh Hashanah fully out, simply writing. Oftentimes, abbreviations and acronyms are more about the writing of things than others. Here's what I talked about before. Rambam. Rambam stands for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the Greek name Maimonides. In Hebrew, this is, again, when it comes to Jewish tradition, names of people whose names are who are important enough in our tradition to get their own acronym, we pronounce as a word. Rambam, Ramban, Rashi, Rashbag, Arizal. I could keep going. There's many, many other rabbis and other illustrious names. That's the idea here. Okay, Rambam, another great example. Another army term, Ramatkal. Ramatkal, Rosh Mate Klali, General Chief of Staff of the Army. Shabak, or the Shin Bet, this is an interesting word because even in the English, we say Shin Bet. Shin Bet is already part of the abbreviation, right? Where we're saying it in English, even though you'll sometimes hear it referred to as that in Hebrew by Israelis, but oftentimes it's simply Shabak, because the full name of the agency is Sherut HaBitachon HaKlali, the General Security Services, right? Shabak, Shin Bet. This one you will hear, Shach. Shach stands for Shkalim Chadashim. Remember that in Israel since the 1980s, our unit of currency in Israel is NIS, not ILS, which is simply Israel shekel. when Israel went through a terrible devaluation of the shekel, it renamed its currency as part of its general economic overhaul. Great articles about that online, as well as on videos and documentaries. All you need to know is that in modern Hebrew, this is the abbreviation. You can pronounce it as shach instead of shekel or shkalim. And this is the abbreviation, the signage that we use for it, which is exactly the abbreviation. If you look at this signal, this insignia, just like the dollar sign or the pound sign or the euro sign or others, the Hebrew logo for our currency is the combinations of the letter shin and chet. Shach, shkalim chadashim. The shin, right? You see this on the right-hand side. It starts at the top and goes down and curves over, whereas the chet does the opposite. That's where our logo comes from. Another one you see in political parties, we don't have as many nowadays. We used to. We used to have a really big party in Israel called Mapai, Mifleget Poalei Israel, Poalei Eretz Israel. We now have an important party in politics called Shas. Shas is also an acronym. In this case, it stands for Hitachdut HaSfaradim HaOlamim Shomrei Torah. A long name. Shas is also the name of the abbreviation for the name of the Mishnah. So it's also a play on words in that respect. Another one you'll hear often, maybe not all the time, but certainly in recent public service announcements, is instead of saying Tachbura Tziburit, 6 syllables, to say public transportation, you can simply say Tachbatz. 6 syllables, 2 syllables, 2 syllables will always win. Tachbatz. Tachbatz, public transportation. All right, speeding along, because I see we have quite a number in the Q&A. Let's get to some cities. Some cities are abbreviated, some aren't. What's the rhyme and reason? There isn't. Remember, like I said, there are no standardized rules for acronyms and abbreviations in Hebrew. It's just what's commonly accepted and what's commonly understood by people, because the whole idea of communication and language, folks, is communication, is to be understood, not just to talk, but to be heard. I know a lot of people on this call, myself included, always need to remind ourselves the point of communication is not to talk. It's also just as much, if not more, to be heard. If you're not being heard, you're not communicating. With that, Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, is often abbreviated as an exception, Yud Makaf Mem Sofi. This is very different than others. First off, because they want to condense the amount of letters. Yerushalayim is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 letters. Instead, condense it to 2 letters. It's not normally abbreviated, right? We've seen before how things are abbreviated when they are one word. This is an exception to the rule where we use a dash instead of it. Okay, but you will see this spelled quite a lot like this. For example, if you're watching sports in Israel and you see the names of the teams on the board or on the screen of who's playing, and let's say it's Hapoel Yerushalayim, it will say Hapoel Yud Makaf Mem. That stands for Hapoel Yerushalayim. Anyone watching would know that's their team, not just because of the jerseys they're wearing. One that's unfortunately in the news, Kiryat Shmona. Kiryat Shmona is often in the news and in writing and in general abbreviated as Kuf Shin. Okay, Kiryat Shmona, the Kuf of Kiryat, and the Shin of Shmona. Rishon LeZion. Rishon LeZion has 2 options. You can either say Rishon, and everyone knows, just like I'm sure a lot of you already pronounce it as Rishon, or by its abbreviation, which is taking Rishon and LeZion, Rashlatz. Either one is understood. I'm going to say Rishon is more heard, generally more heard than Rashlatz, but they're both there. Ramat Gan is abbreviated as Resh Gimel. Again, simple abbreviation. First letter of Ramat, first letter of Gan. And finally, Tel Aviv. These are just a few of many examples. Just like we do in English, TLV or TA, Taf Aleph. You will hear people say Ta. It's more like a joke, just like Chubatim, right? Someone who's really full of themselves or where they live, and they ask you me'efu ata, where are you from, as in where do you live in Israel, not where are you from originally, and you answer ta with a little emphasis on the ta, you're really saying, oh, of course, Tel Aviv, right? Tel Aviv, Taf Aleph. Same thing. If you're watching a sports match and it says Maccabi Taf Aleph, it's only referring to Maccabi Tel Aviv. All right, let's look at some ones that are in the news most recently before I take your questions. And let me make these slightly bigger for everyone. There we go. Okay, Mada. Mada, or Magen David Adom, abbreviated to Mada, Magen David Adom, Israel's ambulance and first aid services and emergency services, Israel's equivalent of the Red Cross, Mada, Magen David Adom. No one, unless they want to emphasize it, they'll simply say Mada. These two are in the news a lot. The first one more than the other one, but they're an important distinction. Militarily, for us, you really don't need to know the difference. Katbam and Katmam. Katbam is a unmanned aerial vehicle. In English, it's often abbreviated as UAV, and you'll hear people talk about UAVs. In Hebrew, we only talk about Katbamim. You will hear people say Klei Tais Bilti Meuyash, or if you're watching the news when one of those alerts comes up, it'll say Klei Tais Oyen, an enemy or a hostile aerial vehicle. But what this stands for is Klei Tais Bilti Meuyash. Klei Tais, Kli is a vehicle or a tool or an instrument. Tais, aerial, from the verb latus, to fly. Bilti, we've talked about before, non. Meuyash. Meuyash comes from the word ish, man. Manned is meuyash. So an unmanned aerial vehicle, katbam. Klei tais bilti meuyash. Klei tais bilti meuyash, katbam. Okay. Very much related, slightly different in how it's operated and so forth, is a katmam. Katmamim, and that's how we pluralize it, has been around for much longer than katbamim. Katmamim are klei tais meuyash merachok, a aerial vehicle, meuyash, manned, merachok, from a distance, or as I wrote here, remote controlled drone. A katbam isn't necessarily controlled from a distance, but a katmam is. Okay, katbam may not be able to change its direction. A katmam usually can because it's remote controlled. Okay, both of those unfortunately in the news. And then three words that sound very similar but are very much not. And these are important words because they are said a lot in the news lately. And in general, you should know the difference between these. I've also made the mistake of interchanging two of these together. Not a good idea. Shatap. Shatap stands for Shituf Pula. If you're in work, if you are, whatever you're doing in life, you often have to collaborate with someone, right? It's often good for business to do a collaboration, a shituf peula. In Hebrew, collaboration, shituf peula. But look at all those letters. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 letters for collaboration. Collaboration is a long word in English. Hebrew doesn't like long words, even if they're two separate words. So instead of saying shituf peula, 5 syllables, 10 letters, we can simply say shatap. אני רוצה לבנות שת"פ איתך. I want to build a collaboration with you, right? Much easier to say, much quicker to say, and most of the time people will get what it means. However, just because it sounds similar in topic does not mean it's the same thing. Shatap, a collaboration, is different than a mashtap. A mashtap is a person, a mishatef peula. If shituf peula, collaboration, is the act of collaborating, the person who collaborates with you, you would normally say collaborator, right? In Hebrew, however, in modern Israel, mishatef peula, if you call someone a mishatef peula, or specifically a mashtap, it means they're a collaborator in a bad sense, right? There's someone who's collaborating against you. Against you. Okay? You don't want to be called a mashtap. You are a conspirator. You are a collaborator with the enemy or anything along those lines. A mashtap is a bad thing. Shatap is great. Mashtap, bad. And then finally, one unfortunately in the news is shabach. Shabach stands for shoheh bilti chuki, an illegal resident. Literally, someone who is shoheh, who is residing, bilti chuki, illegally. Bilti, ill, non, all those prefixes meaning no or not, and chuki, legal. So an illegal resident. Shoheh bilti chuki, someone who is residing illegally in Israel. Okay, shabach. Okay, these are just a small fraction, folks, as you saw, of that whole website. Obviously, we're going to send you that website. I see there are 20 questions in the Q&A. Let's see how many I can do with the little time I have remaining, and before I tell you about next week's class, or the next time we meet, rather. All right, just 1 second. Let me pull that up. Just 1 minute. Chat. Sorry, the Q&A, not the chat. Okay. Mankal. Mankal, great. Let's start putting these in our list. Mankal. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. I want to pull up next week's. Meet. There we go. Okay. Just 1 minute, folks. There we go. Okay. That's what I thought. Okay. So with that, let's look at Mankal. Mankal. Mankal stands for Menahel Klali, right? General director literally translates to Menahel, the manager, the boss, Klali, general. This can be a CEO, or an exec director, right? Depending on what sector you're in, CEO usually for-profit, executive director non-profit. Mankal can apply to anything. Mankal is the person at the top of the pyramid. Is there equivalent in Hebrew equivalent for Q&A? So there is in Jewish tradition, which is, we don't use it in everyday Hebrew, which is she'elot utshuvot. This Mankal. You do hear people talking about shut, but in modern Hebrew, this is not modern Hebrew. I'm going to put it here regardless because Jewish tradition does give us a lot, not in mod Ib. Okay, Q&A. Put that there. Q&A. Okay. I see people asking questions about things I already answered and didn't remove those questions, but nonetheless, thank you for asking them. Could you include in this chupchik list they're used in converting letter sounds such as Gimel to J? That is a different topic altogether. We have a whole other lesson about the sounds of Hebrew and creating new words. And we talk about how do you create new sounds. Highly recommend, again, youtube.com. Do you say it as Oleh Din? Nope, I already went over that. Do you say it for lawyer? Nope, I went over that. Folks, if it says on here there's an X pronounced as a word, it means it's not. Lawyer X, not pronounced as a word. If I'm typing something and I accidentally use the double yud instead of the double apostrophe, will a Hebrew speaker get what I'm trying to type, or is it just gibberish? It is just gibberish, and I will prove it to you by telling you a very famous story I always tell about Hebrew. So my name in modern Hebrew, even though my name is obviously not Hebrew, but I kept it because that is very much my name, is spelled in modern Hebrew like this. You see the difference? Typographically, that's important. You see that the geresh that makes the gimel a j sound is higher than the two yods. If you were spelling it out, you usually write the geresh as a slant at an angle, and the yod is at 0 degrees. That's an important distinction because of how my name is spelled. So the classic story I always tell is in, sorry, just waiting for the emergency sirens to go by. The classic story is that when I shortly after I started going to a Jewish day school from public school, I went from Ulpan to advanced Hebrew. And this is how you write my name in Hebrew. It transliterated, and we had a substitute that day, and she was going through the names. I'm a 14-year-old, and she's getting closer to my name, and I said, oh no, she's gonna say it. She's gonna say it. Gay, איפה gay? מי זה gay רוזן? אתה gay? מי זה gay? It's very important you distinguish between a geresh or a chupchik and a yud from personal experience alone. I've noticed that in abbreviations, the final letter doesn't take the Sofit form Y. Again, there are no rules with this because katbam is absolutely spelled with the mem Sofit at the end, whereas shatap is spelled with the pay at the end. First off, shatap is spelled with the pay to make sure that you pronounce it as p, right? Because it's shituf pe'ula. If you were to spell it as a pei sofit, that automatically has the sound th in Hebrew. Okay, so they want to be sure that you're pronouncing correctly. This, however, versus this, there is no difference, right? Again, there are no rules. Do Israelis use biragil rather than bederch klal? No, biragil is not a word. Keragil, as usual, is a word. Bederch klal, usually, we use this word all the time, this expression. What is the Hebrew equivalent of etc.? Great question. It's going to look like this. Vechule or veke'ele. Either way means etc. Vechule. Is a weekend Shabbat only in Israel? I don't know what that means. Sof Shavua literally means weekend. Even though Israel doesn't use pounds, LB, is there an abbreviation for it? Not that's commonly known because we don't use it. Great question, though. What is the difference between al-yad and liyad? You gave an abbreviation of the former. I did. Al-yad is by or at the hands of. Liyad is next to. Liyad, next to. Al-yad, at the hands of or by. What about Ramat Beit Shemesh? Is there an abbreviation for this city? Not that's commonly known. First off, Ramat Beit Shemesh is not a city. It's part of Beit Shemesh. Beit Shemesh is abbreviated oftentimes as, you guessed it, this, which is also the way you abbreviate another city. This is both Beit Shemesh. This is also Beersheva. Okay, both of them are often abbreviated like this. Context is obviously important. I know there are a lot of Anglos who live in Ramat Beit Shemesh, but folks, there was a line in a sitcom I was watching today. There are millions of stars all gravitating around one planet, and that planet is not you. That's a nice way of saying Ramat Beit Shemesh is not that big of a deal in the rest of the world, in that it is part of Beit Shemesh. It is not its own city. I know a lot of people on this call probably live there or know loved people there. Ramat Beit Shemesh, I know many Anglos, native English speakers, refer to it as RBS. That's not going to be known in everyday society in Israel. Mamad, Miklat, and there are others. Miklat is not an abbreviation, folks. Miklat is its own word. Miklat is an entire word that simply means a shelter. Miklat. Okay. Mamad, however, is indeed an acronym. Okay. Merchav Mugan Diratit, an apartment safe room. Okay. Merchav, space, Mugan, saved, Dirati. I'll write it out here. Merchav Mugan Dirati. Miklat, however, is not an abbreviation or an acronym for anything. Bagatz, we've talked about before. Beit Din Gvoha Tzedek, the Supreme Court. We talked about that actually a few weeks ago. Shabak sounds like Shabach. I really look. There's one thing about I get that for people who aren't used to guttural sounds like ch. However, there's a distinct difference between k and ch. If you can't pronounce it, that's one thing, but if you can't hear it, that's an entirely other thing. Shabak, shabach. They're spelled differently with two different letters. Shabak, shabach. Right? And also context, folks. We're not talking about words, even though they're listed here in a vacuum, we don't use these words in a vacuum. There's going to be no situation in which you are going to confuse one person, an illegal resident, with the entire entity and organization known as Shabak. Just none. That you can't pronounce it is a thing you need to work on, because that's not about accents. That's about the difference between the k and ch sound. Ch may be hard for some people. I get that. You need to find a way to make that understood. The other way you can pronounce ch is a raspier, more Spanish sounding, like the J letter. Jota, ha. Right? Just like the other form of how to say the letter chet in modern Hebrew is het. In which case there's a very distinct difference between kuf, kaf, and het. Okay, there we got to stop. We are way over time now. First off, toda rabah. Thank you all for joining. You will get a copy of this lesson along with the spreadsheet in the next day or two, and obviously the link to that website, that great resource we had, kitzul.co.il. A little bit about our calendar because of the upcoming holidays. So we do not have Cafe Oleh conversations this week, as it's Erev Sukkot. Next week, we do not have Cafe Oleh Mondays or on Wednesdays because of Chol Hamoed and the remainder of the holiday. The following week, we are back on the, let me just make sure that's correct. On the, yes, we are back here at Cafe Oleh on Monday, October 28th, so 2 weeks from today, where we're going to be talking about a very important thing, Acharei Chagim, after the holidays, which is making plans. Okay, so until then, there's a lot of stuff for you to review. There's a lot of resources out there that we're sending you, that's on our YouTube channel and so forth. We'd love to hear from you, of course. But in the meantime, before sign off, wishing you all a happy, safe, and hopefully quiet Chag Sameach. And we'll see you all very soon here online. Take care. Lihitraot.